Welcome to Port Hostage Diplomacy. We work to free hostages and the unjustly detained around the world. Together with their families, we share their stories every week and let you know how you can help bring them home. I'm Darren Nair, and I've had the honor of campaigning with many of these families for years. These are some of the most courageous and resilient people among us, people who have never given up hope, people who will never stop working to reunite their families. And we will be right there by their side until their loved ones are back home. Thank you for joining us. And now, let's meet this week's guest. Welcome to this week's episode of Port Hostage Diplomacy. Today marks 2 years and 20 days since Trevor Reed, an American citizen and former US Marine, has been unjustly detained in Russia. The current US ambassador to Russia, John Sullivan, has stated that Trevor Reed is innocent and that this is a gross miscarriage of justice. The current US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, spoke to his Russian counterpart, Foreign Minister Lavrov, and called on Russia to release Trevor Reed so he can return home to his family. President of the United States, Joe Biden, raised Trevor's case with President Vladimir Putin when they both met at the Biden-Putin summit, and told reporters shortly after that he raised Trevor's case with the Russian president and said he's going to follow through with that discussion and he's not going to walk away on that. Members of both the US House of Representatives and the US Senate have passed resolutions calling for the immediate release of Trevor Reed and for him to be allowed to return home. America may appear divided on many issues, but when it comes to Trevor Reed, the White House, State Department, Senate, and House of Representatives all agree that the Russians must release Trevor Reed immediately and allow him to come home to the United States. Now, Trevor is not the only American and former US Marine unjustly held in Russia at the moment. Another American and former Marine, Paul Whelan, has also been detained in Russia. Trevor's detention is not an isolated incident, as there appears to be a pattern of unjust detention by Russian authorities targeting American citizens who are former US Marines. Trevor's parents believe that he's being held by the Russian government at the request of the Russian security agency, the FSB, so he can be used as a bargaining chip to extract concessions from the United States. Now, this would be hostage diplomacy. For those of you not familiar with the FSB, it is Russia's Federal Security Service and is one of the successor agencies of the Soviet Union's KGB. I'm joined today by Trevor's parents, Joey and Paula Reed. I'm so sorry for what Trevor, you and your family are going through. We will do everything we can to help bring him home. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Can you please walk us through what happened to Trevor and how he was arrested?
So Trevor went to Moscow to visit his longtime girlfriend, Alina. They'd been dating for about 3 years. She spent her summers and a couple of holidays here in the United States and Texas with us. And he was there for the summer. They were going to kind of make plans for their future to see if they were going to get married or break it off, because of the distance. And he also went there to learn Russian for his international studies courses at the University of North Texas. He was there, and he'd been there for a couple of months for the summer, and he was about ready to come home in August. And there was a big company party in a park because it was Lena's birthday and someone else got promoted. And at that party, everyone knew Trevor and they knew he was leaving. So everyone was toasting him in vodka, and he got extremely intoxicated, not being used to drinking vodka. And they caught a ride home with two other people, and he got sick on the way home. They stopped to let him out of the car, and they couldn't get him to get back in the car. And, he was acting strange and, intoxicated. And so they were afraid he was going to run onto the freeway. So they called the police to help, get him back in the car or take him to the hospital, because in Russia, they don't take drunks to the police station. If they did, their police stations would be overflowing with people. But when the police arrived and they saw he was an American, we figured that they thought, well, he's American, he's got money, and so we can get a bribe, which is, kind of a standard in Moscow and Russia. So they said, well, we'll take him to the police station, follow us there. They went to the police station. They found a lot of money in his wallet because he was going to pay his Russian language teacher the next day. And they asked for half of that money as a bribe to let him go. And, so the girlfriend didn't agree or disagree. So they said, okay, we'll just come back and pick him up at 9 a.m., which is about 4 or 5 hours later. And, cause this is early in the morning, on a Friday morning. She came back with her mother. And at that time, and she called us and let us know everything that was happening. And then when she went back with her mother, the KGB had arrived, and we're going to interrogate Trevor. And by the way, Trevor woke up in the lobby of the police station alone.
FSB.
And he woke up in the lobby alone, unhandcuffed and unguarded, and went to the front desk and said, I'm sick. Is there a bathroom? And they said, over there. And he went and used the bathroom. He came back and said, my phone isn't working. Can someone call my girlfriend to pick me up? And they said, she's on her way to pick you up now. And then just before she got there, the police came out and said, you can't leave. And then, of course, about the time she got there, the FSB called him back to interrogate him, without a lawyer, without an interpreter, which I believe is technically in violation of Russian law also. The beginning of, literally hundreds of violations of Russian law, that were made to prosecute and keep Trevor in jail. So, then after the FSB left, after doing nothing but questioning about his military, career in the United States, the police then told him that he was being charged with, endangering the lives of police officers, which would be equivalent of a strong felony, like attempted murder of a police officer in the United States. And, so they essentially booked him. And the first thing they held him on was the fact that they said he was improperly registered because he'd been staying at his girlfriend's apartment and hadn't changed his location that he was staying at, which you have to do like the DMV there. You have to go to this big place and change all citizens have to do that. But it was impossible to do it because the owners of the apartment have to do it, and they lived out of the country. And this is a common problem with their registration issue, with the foreigners. So anyway, then he was sent to jail where he's been for over 2 years. And he was railroaded on the whole prosecution. The defense, we hired excellent attorneys, Russian attorneys, and we had video, traffic videos and security videos along the route where the police officers later made up the story that he grabbed the driver's arm and that the car nearly turned over and they had to almost stop. And the officer in the back seat had to grab Trevor to keep him from grabbing the driver's arm anymore and making them crash, and that Trevor elbowed him in the abdomen 2 or 3 times. Now we got video, and then we had Russian government experts analyze the video, and determined that not only did the police car in that large area where they said this happened, did it never swerve into the oncoming lanes. It never swerved at all. It drove completely straight. It never slowed down. It actually sped up in that area. So once that was brought to the prosecution's attention and the police were questioned on it in court, they changed their stories 4 or 5 times. And their last story was they didn't remember what happened. And the judge picked the second or third version that he liked the best and used that in his sentencing. There were, 3 witnesses following the police car in another car, and they didn't see anything happen with the police car ahead of them. And of course, Trevor doesn't remember anything that happened after drinking the vodka and waking up in the lobby. Also, one more thing, key point in most real justice systems, there was a camera inside the police car, which not a dash cam, but a camera that shows what's happening with the police officers and the suspects. And the investigators and the police officers and the people at the police station all confirmed in the trial that camera was working and there was video from the ride to the police station. And they refused to give us that video. We requested it immediately. We told them that it's the standard to erase it in 30 to 60 days and it needed to be held, and we wanted to utilize it. And in Russia, the prosecution and the investigators can refuse evidence to the defense, and they refused to have it. And our attorneys, told the judge, said, look, if you've got this video, Trevor has told you at the beginning of the trial, if you show me that I did something inappropriate, then I will plead guilty and be on the mercy of the court. And so the defense said, why have we spent all these months in court? And if you've got that video, just show it to us. If he did this, he'll plead guilty. This is all over with. And they refused to show it, which, I mean, anyone with any common sense can realize that it showed that Trevor didn't do anything. And no one was hurt. And then and at the end of the long story there is that Trevor was given the longest sentence in modern Russian history for that charge of assaulting police officers. He received 9 years out of a possible 10. And the longest sentence on record in the last 20 to 30 years is 8 years. And that was for suspects who stabbed or shot police officers and nearly killed them. And Trevor didn't hurt anyone.
So you mentioned that murderers get shorter sentences and people with the same charges only have to pay a fine. And
Right.
in this case, no one was hurt. Because even if what the police officers say is true, they were wearing body armor.
Yeah,
Were
the
they?
police officer in the back seat who said he bear hugged Trevor and pulled him back from grabbing the driver's arm. He said Trevor elbowed him. Well, he wasn't sure, maybe 1, 2, or 3 times. He said all of this supposedly occurred in about a 4-second period. And so the police officer later wrote the next day that he had a small bruise on his abdomen. And but he was wearing body armor. And when the defense attorneys questioned him on it, he said he was wearing body armor. And they said, well, they looked at the body armor and they said, and you were in a sitting position in the back seat. And he said, yes. And they said, does your body armor not hit the top of your legs? And he said, oh, no. And it's obvious that it did. And so, an expert said, you can't bruise someone with your elbow that's being held close to you when you're wearing body armor. And the other thing is that police officer never showed the supposed bruise to a single person. So
I also understand that the Russian Supreme Court itself said these charges were excessive. Is that right?
Well, what the Supreme Court said was we initially, about a month after Trevor's arrest, we appealed his bail because the initial judge denied his bail. And so we appealed that. And really it was the only good outcome we had in any of the, 30 or 40 hearings we've had. And that judge actually granted Trevor bail based on the fact that we showed that we already had video and it had already been analyzed by government experts and that he didn't do any of this. And he hadn't been allowed to say any of that in his first arraignment. And that judge granted bail. They immediately appealed that and threw it out. The grounds for throwing it out and denying bail was that he was not properly registered. He was a foreigner and that he was a flight risk and that it was a severe charge. And we appealed that all the way to the Supreme Court, what they call the Constitutional Supreme Court of Russia. And that court and an appellate court just below it, both said that it was a violation of Russian law to deny him bail based on the fact that he was improperly registered because he had no control over that. And his girlfriend really didn't either, the person he was staying with, because the owners who the law is messed up is what it is. And, if the owners live in France, they're not going to fly all the way back from France, to go and spend 10 minutes at the office to get him his little registration card changed. And that, by the way, that's a problem with all Airbnbs in Russia. So, a lot of them, they give you your Airbnb and you get there and they say, okay, well, I need my registration. Oh, we don't do that. So
I'm a bit baffled here. How is it that the Supreme Court, which I'm assuming is the highest court in Russia, is able to say he should be granted bail, but a lower court refused? How is that possible?
Well, and Paula and I attended the Court of Causation, which is like a federal appeals court. The Supreme Court sent it back to them to handle it, said, yeah, this is improper. It's a violation of procedures and law. You cannot deny us bail based on this. So they sent it back to the Court of Causation, and the Court of Causation agreed. And this was strange. The prosecutor agreed. And by the way, in Russia, it's not like your case and your appeals all have one prosecutor. Every courtroom that you go to, there's a new prosecutor who knows basically nothing about your case but what he's given, in a little folder. And because they don't really have to do much work they say we want this or he's guilty, and the judges go, okay. And then you fight to get your sentence lowered. It's a punishment system, not a justice system. But anyway, this prosecutor said at the appeals court said, oh, we don't have a problem with him being released on bail, but because this is a new court and it's during the COVID, we don't have the means of bringing him in and releasing him here because he wasn't actually in the jail. He wasn't in the courtroom. He was on video. And they said, so let's send it back to the Moscow City Court, to handle, releasing him. And then they sent it back to the Moscow City Court where the whole thing started, at least the appeals part started. And they denied him being released based on the same grounds that the Supreme Court had said were invalid. So the Supreme Court doesn't have apparently the ultimate authority over certain things in Russia. So,
can you talk to us about Trevor's closing statement? I believe his closing statement was, "I would rather stay in prison an honest man than walk away tomorrow a liar and a coward." That was his closing statement prior to being sentenced. He refused to plead guilty. Can you just talk to us a bit more about that?
So I was at all of his hearings, and that day, CBS and ABC News, and I believe maybe one other news agency was present. It was the day before his sentencing. And by the way, when he said those things, he said, I think it's immoral, and it would be wrong for me to admit guilt to something that I didn't do. And he said, what's been shown in court, I mean, anyone, with any, again, common sense could see that I didn't do this. And so I'm not going to plead guilty. And he said, and they also prefaced it by saying to the judge that I know if I plead guilty, I might get a shorter sentence. But he said, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sit here and be a coward and plead guilty to something I didn't do just so you give me 1 or 2 years off of some ridiculous prison sentence. And I have to tell you, it was it was almost like something out of a John Wayne movie. I mean, literally everyone but the judge in the room was crying. I mean, the news media, the translator, our female attorney, Victoria. And quite frankly, I think the prosecutor looked uncomfortable too. It's just like, I didn't do this and I'm not going to plead guilty. And it was very, one of the bravest things I've ever seen.
Well, he's a very honorable man, and you should definitely be proud of him. I'm sorry for what's happened to Trevor and what you're all going through. Since he's being arrested, detained, he hasn't been given appropriate access to medical care. It's my understanding that communications have been cut off several times. He's been transferred from one prison to the other, and the Russian authorities didn't tell the US government or yourselves where they transferred him. And he's apparently working in a labor camp. Can you just talk to us about where he's being held, the conditions, etc.?
Oh, actually, he's at a prison camp now, but he's not working. He has refused to do forced labor, so he's in solitary confinement. Prior to that, they had moved him to a hospital when he had COVID. But before that, they had moved him for an evaluation, supposedly. And they took him to a psychiatric ward and left him there for a few days. That was one of the times when we didn't know where he was. We feel that was an intimidation tactic.
No, they sent him. He went to a hospital for an evaluation, and then he was supposed to be sent back to his Moscow jail, but he never returned to his jail, and no one would tell us where he went. This lasted 9 days. They took him to one of the top 10 worst prisons in the world, and they put him in a psychological ward of the worst prison. Trevor said there were like 7 or 8 murderers in the room that were, had mental issues. There was blood all over the walls, and there was a hole in the floor for the bathroom. And he was in there for a couple of days, and a doctor, realized, he shouldn't be in here. And they moved him to another cell with one guy, but it took him 9 days. And it was 7 days before they would tell, the embassy where he was. Well,
and then even at that time, when they did tell the embassy where he was, they said it was an administrative error, that they didn't know the people who were taking him back from the evaluation. They didn't know he was supposed to go back to the court, the jail in Moscow where he had been before. And I think probably the embassies has to deal with all these kinds of things. And so they were just like, okay, that's what we're going to just go with. However, when we talked to Trevor after that, Trevor said before he went for the evaluation, they made him pack up all his personal belongings before he left. So they already knew they were going to take him somewhere else when the evaluation was over. But they told the embassy that it was an administrative error and they just made a mistake. And we feel it was just to intimidate him. So yeah, we've had a lot of times where we couldn't communicate with him, and also the embassy didn't communicate with him. And sometimes, probably because we're his parents, we think the embassy should have tried harder, possibly, to, make those connections.
We're very happy with the State Department and SPIHA, Special Presidential Envoy on Hostage Affairs, and the embassy and everything they're doing now. But, initially we had some issues. There was a period of time where Trevor had no contact whatsoever with the embassy for 4 months. No phone calls, no court appearances where they were at. There was no visitations, nothing at all. Part of that was a couple of months where they couldn't have any visitors. But, and now
we still could have phone calls.
And now that the embassy has not been allowed to contact Trevor for, about 40 days. Because, when they transferred him to the prison camp, they refused to tell us where he went. And then now after a month, they told the embassy where he's at, but they won't let him have any contact with us or with the embassy. No letters, no phone calls, no nothing. We paid an attorney to go visit him, a week ago. And that's how we found out that he had told them he wasn't going to be forced to work. And he was in a small, room again with a hole in the floor, I think, for a toilet. And, he can use a bed at night. And that's it. He's locked in a room by himself because he's refusing to work. We still haven't heard from him. So,
okay. I still can't get past the fact that this was a guy charged for being drunk and disorderly and he was interrogated by the FSB.
Yes.
I've never known someone who was drunk and disorderly in the United States who did end up being interrogated by the FBI, Homeland, or the CIA. So why is someone who's drunk and disorderly being interrogated by the FSB in Russia?
Darren, if you assaulted a police officer, let's say here in Texas, would you expect the FBI to come and ransack your home and confiscate all of your electronic devices?
No.
Which is what happened. Which is what happened. They confiscated all of his girlfriend's computers and telephones at her home like a month after his arrest.
So clearly there is something that they're not telling us. So there's obviously a malicious reason behind Trevor's arrest. Can you talk to us about his background? Because I know he was a United States Marine. You mentioned that Trevor joined the Marine Corps to fight in Afghanistan.
Well, first I want to touch on what you said is like, there's been a lot of talk the last week because of the Marines who died in Afghanistan. A lot of them were, I guess, what you would call, children of the Afghanistan war. They've never known a time when we weren't at war. Trevor, was old enough, when 9/11 happened that I'm sure like millions of other children, it affected him. And he was a Cub Scout and a Weeblo and a Boy Scout and an Eagle Scout. And he was very active in sports and school. And I had been in the Marine Corps. We didn't, push that. I didn't want my son to join the Marine Corps just because it's, it's very hard, especially if you're in the infantry. But he had made up his mind somewhere along the way that he wanted to be in the Marine Corps. And he joined, but then in boot camp, I think partially because of his athletics and his Eagle Scout, they asked for volunteers for presidential security. And out of, I think, 400 Marines in his company, I think they whittled it down to two or three, maybe four, that actually made the initial screening process. And then he had to enlist for an additional year, a fifth year, to be eligible for the program, or because you have to go to special training and then you go stand guard over Marine Corps headquarters in Washington, D.C. for a year or more while you've got, FBI, Secret Service, NCIS, all these backgrounds going on, all these screenings going on. And then once you pass that, you're either moved to the White House Communications Agency, or to Camp David. And he was assigned to Camp David. So needless to say, I think they say 0.1% of all Marines are selected for that position. You're allowed to stand next to the President of the United States with an automatic weapon. And I think that requires a lot of, confidence that you're loyal to the United States and to the President. So.
I understand that money and time, the effort you spent, was to convince the US that Trevor was innocent, not Russia. Could you just elaborate further?
Yeah, in fact, I'll be honest with you, Trevor I think he's calmed down some, but for the first year, he was really, really angry with us that we had spent the amount of money that we did for these attorneys, because he was in cells with millionaires, that were, you have to remember too, Trevor believes that over half of the people that he's met in jail are completely innocent. And a majority of the other people that are in prison are there for nonviolent crimes. They're there for alleged, breaking some trademark law or import law or whatever. And a lot of those are schemes where someone who doesn't like you or a competitor files charges against you, and then you're arrested, and then you lose your business because you're sitting in jail or in court. And so he
Well, the thing was, first of all, Trevor did want it to be clear to at first when it happened,
Right.
He didn't want us to tell anyone because he was embarrassed and ashamed. And especially because he had been an Eagle Scout and because he was presidential security detail, he didn't want to bring any dishonor to America. So he didn't want us to let anyone know at first. But then when we saw that they weren't going to let him go, and we started talking about getting an attorney and stuff, he wanted us to do that so that we could prove that he was innocent. However, he didn't want us to spend a lot of money doing it because he said, and the people that he spoke to in Russia said, it doesn't really matter. You're going to be
Right.
found guilty no matter what. So save your money, et cetera, et cetera. But we really wanted there to be a defense put on, in the other cases, they just don't, like they said, they just negotiate. Okay, I'm guilty. And then you just sentence me. And he told us that what they would do is say, the prosecutor says, I want this much. And the judge says, and how much does the defense want? The defense says, and the judge picks usually somewhere in between. But we didn't want that. We wanted Trevor to be seen as truly innocent because he is. And plus, Trevor also wanted to know, since he couldn't remember, because he said, if I did this, then I want to plead guilty, because if I did that, that's horrible, because Trevor has a lot of friends who are police officers in the community that he grew up in, where a lot of fire department families, a lot of sheriff department families. And he said, I would never in his right mind assault a police officer. And so he thought that if there was any possibility whatsoever that he did while he was intoxicated, that he deserved to pay the price, because that's how hard he was on himself. But we wanted to prove that he didn't do it for the United States and for himself. And so for all of our friends to know that he was not guilty of that.
The United States generally does not get involved in cases of an American arrested, unless it's like a case where they're directly saying that the person is an agent of the United States. Like Paul Whelan. And, which again is horrible. And, so they let it run its course. And they're not involved a lot. And so we wanted to make sure that the United States government understood, our lawyers and people that we're talking to in the system are telling us that there's something really wrong here, because they're breaking every rule. They're breaking every court practice and law to keep him in here and to put the heaviest charges on him. Like you said before, we have cases in Russia where people did what Trevor was accused of, and they paid a fine and were released.
And some put the policeman in the hospital. Some broke.
Yeah, no, there was a guy that was intoxicated, and he grabbed the driver, and the other policeman in the back seat stopped him, and he hit him in the eye, and that policeman went to the hospital for an eye injury. That guy paid a fine and was released. We were told by government officials that normally they would never put this charge on Trevor, that even if he did what they said he did, it would be an infraction. Or a misdemeanor. You would pay a fine and be released. So, but we wanted to prove his innocence and,
beyond the shadow of a doubt.
Anyone who went, you can ask anyone who went to that court. In fact, I'm pretty sure that sitting on the other side, on one of the final days of the hearing, or when the sentencing, there was a TASS reporter, the main Russian news agency, sitting on the other side of, the ABC reporters next to me. And he was shaking his head, and he got up and left halfway through, just kind of like, this is a joke. I mean, that's the Russian reporters. I mean, it was obvious to everyone in the court. If you were there for more than an hour on any given day, it's like, okay, this is a scam. There's nothing, because we proved, even the guards, because, they put Trevor in a cage in the courtroom, And they put a guard on both sides like he's some danger to everyone being handcuffed inside a cage. But anyway, it's for show. And they have these guards there. And when our attorneys were questioning the police officers, these guards looked dumbfounded. Like in their careers, they had never seen defense attorneys, attack police officers for their actions and their changing stories like ours did. And we were very happy with our attorneys and the way that they were. Like I said, any real courtroom in the world, this would have been a hands down. Get this, stop here, let him go.
Well, also, Joey said a couple of times, because I wasn't in Russia the entire time like Joey was, after a few of the first initial hearings, translators that were there to work for the court came in and said to Joey, they apologized. They said, we're sorry that our country is doing this to your son. And there must be some big reason that we don't see, because there's no way he should be going through all of this for that kind of charge.
Again, I'm very sorry for what you're going through. I came across your campaign, the Free Trevor Reed campaign, over a year ago, and that's when I started following you. I've been working with many families of those held hostage and unjustly detained around the world. I know there is no playbook to follow for the families. So can you talk to us about your decision to go public, and what was your plan when you started the Free Trevor Reed campaign?
Well, obviously each individual hostage or wrongful detainee, and that's the first thing you need to do is look up and dig and find the State Department's definition of hostage versus wrongful detainee, and then ask someone to explain it to you. And I know that that's apparently in a constant draft mode. It's changing and it's fluid. But first of all, understand that, and then you have to understand that every group or nation that you're dealing with has it's a different situation. I mean, there's some similarities, but they're all can be radically different also. Like if it's some terrorist group, obviously you may not want to publicize it too much, because they might just kill them. They might just kill your family member. And in certain nations, that basically are just, rogue nations, that if you were to talk negatively about them, they might, torture them or do something that they weren't doing until you started making them look bad.
It's a retaliation.
Right. And luckily, and I have to say this, luckily, other than the strange treatment that Trevor's gotten compared to other Russian prisoners, Trevor has not, well, of course, we haven't talked to him in, a month and a half, but to this point, he hasn't been tortured. And I think, Paul Whelan had some mistreatment initially, but so we've been lucky in that respect that he hasn't been physically mistreated. He doesn't get medical treatment, but that's pretty much standard for all prisoners in Russia. So anyway, the playbook was in the United States. If you want, because I look at the government, myself being a government worker, you've got the professional part of the government, people that are government workers with college degrees in whatever field it is they do. And then you've got elected officials. Well, the elected officials tell the government professionals what to do. But so you've got to affect the political people, and you do that through the media. It's like this big ecosystem, this circle of life. And so you've got to affect politicians, try and do it directly, but also through the media. The more media attention you get, then the more apt elected officials are to act. And so we started that. We started a letter writing campaign for everybody to contact their congressman. So obviously in Texas and in California, where we used to live, we had a lot of people do that. And then we got great support from our Congressman Conaway and now Congressman Pfluger here in Texas, along with Congressman McCall, we're not even his constituents, but he's the ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And he's been fantastic. He's been a real cheerleader for Trevor's case all along, and help move through the two resolutions in the House. Yeah,
but first, Darren, I want to point out though that, like you said, we waited a little while before we tried to go public because of Trevor's desire to not bring bad light on him or our family. But once we did decide that we wanted to do that, besides the letter writing campaigns, and because, we're from Texas, Trevor and Taylor were both born here, but they grew up in California. So they had the letter writing campaigns on both sides, but we still had a hard time getting media support, like national coverage, because every time it seemed like we kind of joked about it. Every time something happened where we thought we were getting some momentum, then something bigger in the world happened, like it was the impeachment. And then there was the second impeachment. And then there was Black Lives Matter. And then there was COVID. And all these things, absolutely newsworthy and everything. But as Trevor's parents, we were just sitting like, oh my gosh, right when we thought we were getting somewhere, something like this happens. And it's just very frustrating because, it is hard to get the media's attention. And even though you have social networks, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff, neither Joey nor I had a Twitter account. We each had Facebooks, but we weren't on it a lot, and that's more like a young kids thing, Instagram or whatever. But we were told when we got in touch with Jonathan Franks, he said, you need to get a Twitter account, you need to get Instagram's account, you need everything. So, because you just have to blast it out there. We just weren't aware of that, at the time. It was just really hard for us.
We've also searched for, luckily we had other people who were already in this situation who advised us, hey, here's some people we could call. And we contacted Jonathan Franks. Jonathan Franks works for Montel Williams, and Jonathan helps us both politically and with the media. He has contacts in both areas, and Montel, he works for Montel, and Montel supports him in doing that. And they've been an unbelievable help. We would, and so we have Montel who's in our corner, but it's always great if you can find some celebrity, to kind of at least be there, if not a spokesperson for your family. And other than Montel, we've been unable to get anyone, including former Marines, former generals, anyone of any stature, like movie stars or comedian, anyone that.
Or even the Marine Corps wouldn't even do anything.
Oh, the Marine Corps has never, spoken out at all about Trevor, which, me being a Marine myself, the whole Semper Fidelis is just like, well, where is it? It's like, is that just it's not, is it not real anymore? Is it, something you just say? Semper Fidelis is their motto, which means always faithful. Like, you always help your brother and sister Marine. And other than the Marines who served with Trevor, who, we've had a lot of contact with the Marines that have served with Trevor, and, it just makes you cry, the things they say about what a great, Marine he was, and that they wouldn't have made it through the Marine Corps if it hadn't been for him, and things of that nature. But the Marine Corps as a whole, we're really surprised that,
no one's reached out to us from the Marine Corps.
Yeah. I mean, a few Marines, follow us on Twitter and things like that. And we're thankful for that and sharing this story. But, we just expected a much more support from the Marine Corps as an organization and from its members and former members.
Like I said at the beginning, you're not the only family in this position. Paul Whelan, also an American citizen, also a former U.S. Marine. His family is in the exact same position, and you've been working closely with them. Can you talk to us a bit more about how you've been working with the Whelan family?
Well, first, originally when this happened, Joey's very good about researching stuff, and he went online and started looking up all old articles about Paul Whelan, and he found out the name of the attorney that they were using that was here or whatever. And then I guess Joey reached out to the Whelan family and Elizabeth Whelan, Paul's sister, so it's, we have been working with them lately, more so because they're both in Russia. And like you said, both Marines and stuff, but I'll let Joey elaborate more on.
Yeah, they were just, because they'd already been in this 9 months longer than we had. Of course, Paul, because he's charged with espionage, he's been treated differently. He's been treated worse. He was in solitary confinement for a long time and had no contact with his family. And for the most part with the embassy for like a year. It was a long time. And, no one could attend his trial. His defense attorneys who were, hired by the Russian government, said that, no evidence was presented in the court, because everything's secret. So we believe that was also a railroad. And and I don't mean this derogatory. I mean it into his defense. We've spoken to government experts that deal with espionage in the United States. And they said Paul Whelan is not someone who would be a candidate, for the CIA or to be a spy. And that also that for the most part, the United States doesn't send spies to Russia. Anybody that would be, in those fields would be someone who works at the embassy, which I'm sure is the same with Russians in America. So Paul Whelan is not a spy. That's complete bogus setup. just like our son just happened into the police, and then someone went, "Oh, look at his visa deal. He's an ex-Marine." Oh, let's call, and then so we call the FSB. Everybody's making a brownie point here. The cops who called the FSB and the FSB who said, "Hey, hold on to this guy, make it look legitimate." Those guys get brownie points. And then it goes on up. And then somebody like, a top prosecutor in Moscow is like, "Hey, yeah, put the heavy charges on this guy. Don't let him go. He makes brownie points." So because it may have not been somebody at the very top who said, "Hey, grab this guy. We're going to use him as a bargaining chip." It starts from the bottom, but then it goes up.
But once they had him, they thought he's an attractive target.
We believe the United States, and when we really got full on support was the day of Trevor's sentencing, where they gave him the longest sentence in modern history for nothing. And, that's immediately the ambassador spoke out, and, we started getting, major support at that point. And we think that 9-year sentence was basically a message to the United States government. Like, hey, we got this guy. He's a former presidential guard who had high security clearances, and we got him, and you've got things we want back. And, so start making a deal.
I've also seen your messages on Twitter where you're worried about US sanctions and escalating tensions between United States and Russia because you're worried that there would be repercussions on Trevor as a result. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Well, a perfect example of that would be Trevor's transfer to this IK-12 location in Mordovia. It's if you look it up online in Russian, there's very little about it. There's like 2 pictures of this prison. And so there's an article from 2 years ago where there were reports of torture and possibly even killings in this prison.
But not by prisoners, by guards.
Oh, yes.
The violence is portrayed as done by the guards, not the prisoners.
Yeah.
And when Trevor was in the first jail in Moscow, he wanted me to know, because of course, obviously I'm concerned about him, and I'm thinking of the American prison system. And he said, "Mom, the prison system here is nothing like it is in America." He said, about 90% of the people in here are innocent. And he said, so there is no criminal element in the prison here. The criminal element that the labor camps, we understand it by reading, is brought upon by the guards. They are the ones who are beating the prisoners. It's not the prisoners beating each other.
So anyway, that's the situation with, where he's at now, from what we know from the one meeting with the attorney.
You also mentioned that there is a big difference between the United States response to Trevor's imprisonment and Alexei Navalny's imprisonment. The outrage was a lot more vocal from the US government, even though one of their own citizens and a former Marine who used to guard their president is in a prison in Russia. Don't get me wrong, Alexei Navalny deserves all the attention he's getting, but so does Trevor. And I understand you were quite surprised in the difference in responses from the US government.
It's not, I don't think it's so much a surprise. It is frustrating. And I know it's, and because where Trevor was at in Moscow, they had a TV in his cell, and with the 5 people he was in there with. And so you get European news, and then so they can see these reports of, the president of the United States calling for Navalny's release, and multiple times. And that's very,
it's demoralizing for Trevor.
Oh my gosh. Can you imagine being in prison because you're a former presidential guard, and both President Trump and to that point, President Biden won't speak about you, but they'll go on and on and on about releasing a Russian dissident. And so, and I'm just saying, I understand the playbook and the strategies behind that. President of the United States can say all he wants about Navalny, and whatever they do to Navalny, it doesn't impact him or an American citizen. Now, when he speaks about Trevor or Paul Whelan, if they were to do something, to them because of what he says, something negative, then that's on him. And so we understand that, that deal. But at the same time, like
you said, it is frustrating for us, but we get to hear things that Trevor doesn't get to hear because he's locked up. So they also told us that, we really didn't want the president going on national TV at that time saying things about Trevor because it raises Trevor's value in the eyes of the Russians. makes it seem like he's more valuable, like we really desperately need him or to come home or whatever. But sitting there as the Marine who, guarded the president, and at the time it was during President Obama and Biden's administration. So it's his president, the vice president at the time, and he's seeing these things on TV, and it had to have upset him. You
have to remember these, and I didn't even think about this till Jonathan Franks mentioned it yesterday. Trevor wasn't Secret Service, but at the same time, all of those Marines that guard Camp David, one of the most secure facilities in the world, they're ready to take a bullet or a bomb or whatever to protect that president, whoever that president is. And as they say, take a bullet for him. And that's not just some Marine. I mean, and these guys added time to their enlistments just to do that. And by the way, go through all the junk you got to go through with that standing guard in Washington, and then the background searches and all those things. Anyway, so you could see how that would be very hurtful to Trevor, not understanding the bigger picture. But we understand why presidents do that.
So for everyone listening or watching this podcast, there is something you can do to help free Trevor Reed. So Joey and Paula, for members of the public that are listening, what can they do to help you or help Trevor?
Right now, we want people to call their representatives and the White House and let them know that Trevor has not been forgotten and that we want to bring him home. He's been there over 2 years. That's long enough.
Too long.
It's too long. And so we want the people just to go online, and there's a form. You can just go online and fill out a little basic form to your representative
or the White House.
And, but there's also a phone number you could call and, just say, hey, what about Trevor? What about Paul? Bring them home,
We're very thankful for the members of the House and the Senate and the president who've all spoken out for Trevor. And, the House and the Senate have put it in writing, and I've had press conferences and again, giant bipartisan support, except for some extremists in the House of Representatives who were voting on a group of bills in which Trevor's resolution was included in. But we're very thankful to Congress and the president for what they're doing, but we want people to contact them so that it stays, and I won't even call it a priority because it's not a priority. It should be a higher priority. And I should mention, because we're older, in our minds, growing up, in America in the 60s and 70s, back then, if you took Americans, even if you were a nation or not, I mean, there were major repercussions. And now it's just like, oh, yes, bring them home, and this is wrong. And there's a lot of rhetoric, but there's not a whole lot. I mean, when's the last time the United States took sanctions against anyone because they took an American hostage or wrongfully detained them? I mean, we put sanctions because of Navalny on Russia, and again, there might be that question of, well, if we do sanctions for Paul and Trevor, what's the repercussions to Paul and Trevor? But anyway, I'm just saying that it's very frustrating with us that it's not a higher priority. And I think, like Congressman McCall said, we have lots of things that we need to discuss and make agreements with Russia, and we shouldn't make any of those until Paul and Trevor are released. And then we can move forward with all those, those big things that we need to do. So the other thing is we have a GoFundMe page, GoFundMe.com/F/free-Trevor-Reed. And we try not to talk about it too much, but it is there. And we use that we have been using it to send food to Trevor to augment the food that he gets in jail. We can't do that now, but we would use that to pay attorneys trips to see him, because right now that's the only way we can communicate with him, to send him books and the other things that we're allowed to do. We use that money to do those things.
Also, I want to bring a point up. Not too long ago, we had a little bit of news coverage, and someone was saying, well, they want to make a switch. They want to do a trade for certain prisoners that they want. We won't name their names. And they were saying, surely you don't want them to release those kinds of prisoners for your son. And I made the comment that I really don't care who they release right now, because I just want my son home. He deserves to be home. But I've had some time to think about that. And we have come to the consensus amongst the two of us that it really isn't a bad idea if they let those people go for Trevor and the reasons why we think it's not a bad idea. Do you want to go into that?
I'll just touch on that a little bit, Darren, if that's okay. So the Russians have said all along there's a lot of Russians in American prisons that they would like to, be returned to Russia. Namely, they have a big problem with America arresting or foreign governments that are friends of ours arresting Russian citizens for crimes that we consider international crimes. And then those people are sent to the United States and tried and put in American prisons. And Russia and many countries have a major problem with that. They kind of like America is the world's police force. And so, they've been asking for certain Russians to be returned that are in that situation, that were arrested on the other side of the world for different crimes. And we're not saying they're not innocent and they didn't do those crimes. But, they were, indirectly affected American citizens. And so, if they've, served, a decade or more in our prisons, and they've falsely taken Trevor and them, they've done time, just make sure they can't do those crimes again. And by the way, some of those prisoners, have medical problems. And
they're aging, they're older.
They're aging, and they probably, why do we want to pay $500,000 to house these prisoners in the United States? That's just for a couple of prisoners for the next 10 years, when we could, send that cost over, and then get our people back financially. It would be a win for us. Again, these aren't, Al Qaeda members or, any terrorist organizations that are directly attacking the United States and things of that nature. So we're open to any type of resolution that will bring Trevor home, a free man, and he will not have any record in the United States because, as far as his future goes, is because, the United States considers his arrest and detention in Russia a wrongful detention. So,
and plus, it's really not our choice to make that decision. Right. We don't get to make that decision. So whatever they end up doing, it's not because of something that we said, hey, let's do this, So we just want our son home.
I completely understand. And if I was in your position, I would want the same thing as well. So the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, who works for the State Department, has been assisting you in some way. There's also a fusion cell that works to recover Americans held hostage overseas. Have you been working with them, and what more can they do to help you?
Well, Roger Carstens is the special presidential envoy on hostage affairs. And I believe he has a lot of people working, for him in that section or group. And, they're, under the State Department. So I believe he works directly for the Secretary of State. And the fusion cell, they're also involved with the hostage fusion recovery cell. Now, we haven't had any direct dealings with them. We deal with the SPIHA office. And that may be because Trevor's considered a wrongful detainee. I'm not sure on that, but they try and keep us informed. They can't tell us everything they're doing. They don't want anyone to know when there's negotiations going on, because if word got out in the media, things could get messed up. And so they just say, well, and we talk to them, to talk to the embassy to try and make contact with Trevor, make sure he's getting medical care, which is a giant hassle to try and get him, even ibuprofen, much less, treatment for COVID. But they've been great. We speak to them weekly. We speak to the embassy sometimes daily. But all I can say is it's our understanding SPIHA, they look at these situations and they're analyzing, the possibilities with this country or this group, what they want and different options and those things. And I guess what I would like to say, it's not that we need more out of SPIHA. We need more out of the NSC and the Secretary of State and the White House. Listen to SPIHA. They need to listen to this group, and they need to, these are the people, like I said earlier, the professionals. These are the people that are looking at all the details and all the options and analyzing the situation and giving, here's option A, B, C, D, whatever. And they need to listen more to them instead of listening to their political advisors.
You mentioned earlier in the podcast, there's a difference in definition of hostage and wrongfully detained. If there's anything the State Department can do better, I mean, obviously there are. What should they do to update this definition?
Well, one thing is, it's our understanding that what I read initially was a hostage is someone who's taken by a non-state actor, like a terrorist group. Versus if you're taken by a government such as Russia, Venezuela, China, Iran, then you're considered wrongfully detained, even though you're taken because of you're a government employee or a government employee or you're a past employee, those type of things. You're considered wrongfully detained. And I'm not positive on this, but my understanding is that if you're considered a hostage, then you're actually given some financial support for assistance with whatever it might be, attorneys or, food and those type of things, versus if you're taken by a state actor like Trevor and Paul are, you get no financial assistance from the government whatsoever. The tens of thousands of dollars that we spent on attorneys in Russia, that's all out. That's all from us. Although we have had, great support from friends and strangers, through our GoFundMe, which have helped, offset some of those costs. And we're just unbelievably grateful and thankful to all the wonderful people who've helped us.
Also, I think that early in the process, before Trevor's sentencing, like Joy said, they really kind of changed their attitude towards the whole situation after Trevor got sentenced. But I understand that they were already in the SPIHA office considering Trevor wrongfully detained, but we were not notified of that, and we were walking around with hurt feelings, like we know our son's innocent. But I think that maybe they could reach out to the families a little bit sooner, or maybe have somebody somebody designated in that area to say, hey, we know you're going through this, and it's not lost on us. We know about it or whatever, because we didn't know that they were doing that. And even though we were talking to the embassy via, emails and stuff, Joey was there, I didn't have any communication with anyone here in the stateside for us to know what was going on.
I think part of that issue, though, may be like how they don't talk to us about their discussions, because if we were to say something by accident, it could impact those discussions. And I think in Trevor's case, they didn't want us to know that they'd already considered him wrongfully detained, because if we were to say something publicly, it could have impacted his sentencing. So that's probably why they were already looking at it and going, okay, what's the deal here? And why are they doing this? And what do they want? And all those things before he was even convicted. And like we said, the 9-year sentence was confirmation that they were right. He was wrongfully detained.
You also mentioned earlier this year, when Secretary Blinken first came into office, he had a call with yourselves and the families of other Americans held hostage and wrongfully detained overseas. He said to yourselves, feel free to criticize us. We want to hear from you. We may do things in the national interest that may not be in the interest of your family. So that was kind of an honor. At least he was honest, right? They might not necessarily do what you want, but at least they'll be honest about it. And that was a change from the previous administration. Now, could you just tell us, how has that changed your campaigning experience for yourselves?
Well, you get a lot more media coverage when you've got the Secretary of State speaking to you and saying your loved one's name in press conferences and through their press briefings and things of that nature. So the media then it piques their interest, and it's like, oh, well, if the government's talking about it, it must be more important. And versus trying to get news coverage, before that was a struggle. We did get AP here and CNN here and ABC, which, by the way, ABC, thank you. We just wish that, Good Morning America would pay more attention to Trevor, because ABC was literally at every trial hearing. Their representatives in Moscow were fantastic. And thank you, Patrick Revel and Tanya.
Right. But also earlier in the previous administration, President Trump and Secretary Pompeo never once said Trevor's name in public. And, there was supposedly this great friendship amongst between Putin and Trump. So we kind of thought that, well, maybe he's doing something behind the scenes or whatever. And they just, again, didn't want to elevate it and by not speaking about it. But it just was very refreshing after that when President Biden was there and Secretary Blinken made the phone call to us and told us, your family members are important to us, and you can criticize us or whatever if you need to. So that was refreshing.
And we understand that. Just like President Carter, I was in the Marine Corps during that time. President Carter wasn't going to send thousands of American soldiers to die while those prisoners, those American hostages, were being held in Iran. And, a lot of people looked at him as being weak for that. But my understanding is President Carter told the Khomeini, if one of those hostages dies, I'll unleash the full force of the United States military against you. And so that's what we're looking for. We don't expect them to cut off. And by the way, we talk about these sanctions against Russia. If they really wanted to make sanctions against Russia, cut their oil imports. Everybody's sitting here complaining about Nord Stream 2 coming into Germany, and they're going to get natural gas, and Russia's going to make a fortune, and it's going to make Germany dependent. Our number one importer of crude oil into the United States right now is Russia.
Not Mexico.
No, they're filling the gap that when we sanctioned Venezuelan oil, we replaced it with Russian oil. So we're sitting here taking millions of gallons of Russian oil and telling the Germans you can't have Russian natural gas. You want to sanction Nord Stream 2, sanction all the Russian oil coming to the United States. But they're not going to do that because it will affect our economy and our gasoline prices, and everything revolves around that. But my point is, when you look back at Carter and then you look back in the times before that, when they took Americans hostage, it was a major deal. I mean, you didn't see anything in the news in 1979 that wasn't every day about the hostages in Iran. Now we've got 2 veterans being held by Russia, and other than just before the summit, we struggle to get a news report here and there, even on local media.
Yeah, Barry Rosen, he was one of the American hostages in Iran. I actually heard him say that back in the day, if Americans were taken hostage, the media coverage was so much better. Mm-hmm. A lot more people would care, and it's not the same now. Where are the ribbons?
Right.
Exactly. So I completely take your point. You are a former Marine. Your son's a former Marine, Joey. What
Right.
can the Marine Corps generals do to help?
Well, one thing we've been asking recently is, and I reached out to General Mattis back when I was in Russia, but he apparently, and his representative responded and said he was aware of Trevor's situation and he was very sorry this was happening, and he hoped everything worked out. But at that time, he was under some 2-year commitment where he couldn't speak out about anything that would impact the current administration, which he had left. But I think that time has passed. And, I'm sure Trevor would love to get a letter from General Mattis, who he and I both highly respect, or any, of the other generals like General Dunford and people that he guarded at Marine Corps barracks. And then there's, obviously there's other generals that he would know. And really right now we're hoping that we can get people like that to write him and tell him, to hang in there, and you're not forgotten. And we care about you, and we think about you all the time, and get through this. Right now, Trevor considers himself a prisoner of war. That's why he's refusing to work. And we're afraid he's going to do something more radical, like, go on a hunger strike or something.
Also, Darren, I want to intercede and say it's not just the Marine Corps that we would like. I would personally love it if President Obama, who Trevor guarded at Camp David, would reach out to Trevor and write a letter.
Or at least contact us so we can tell Trevor that he knows about what's going on with Trevor. I mean, you can see behind us a picture of the president with his hand on Trevor's shoulder, and I and Trevor got to go and have Trevor's photograph taken at the Oval Office, and we liked President Obama. We were supporters of President Obama, and
we just think that would mean the world to Trevor to get
yeah.
a letter like that. That would just be awesome.
No, I completely understand. I've seen the photos. I can see the one right now behind you. Trevor standing right next to President Obama, as well as the photo of yourself, Joey, Trevor, and President Obama in the Oval Office. President Biden, has he spoken to yourselves or Trevor?
No.
No, and I always say this, and I'm told not to say it, but we know that, obviously the Secretary of State and the President are they're the busiest people in the world. We understand that. But, if you're going to be contacting, these other people in related situations, then, take a couple of minutes and just to reach out.
Well, and I always say that it's not really important for me to get a phone call from the president because I do know that he's busy, and especially with Afghanistan and everything going on. If he could use that time to make a discussion or pass it down to someone about how to, get Trevor home, then I'd rather he do that. So.
And we understand that this post summit, there's some kind of discussion going on with Russia. And I realize that he might not want to make any public comments or the Secretary of State regarding the issue. But here's our belief that at some point, if those discussions are going nowhere, then I think it's time to choose a new strategy and how to get an agreement with Russia regarding Trevor and Paul Whelan.
So what can the journalists and news media do to help? So like I said, I've been following your campaign for over a year now. I remember when you had just a Twitter account and a website and a GoFundMe, and now you've been on CNN and Fox. What can journalists and news media do to help? So I would assume that, first of all, not to repeat Russian disinformation. And I would also assume that if the Russians say something about Trevor, they should also contact yourselves as well to get to your side of the argument, not just publish what the Russians have said.
Right. And I don't want to pick on any one news agency, but the news agencies that heavily cover Russia, maybe if you're going to report what is being told to you by the Russian media or by Russian officials, maybe you should preface that in your story and also get feedback from us before you print it, because basically you're just spreading the Russian angle on this. What's happening is the Russian government is utilizing our media to penetrate our public's awareness of the situation and what they want and what they think is going on and their accusations. We're still seeing reports in written form on the internet that Trevor was intoxicated and had a confrontation with police after a night of partying on the town. Trevor was at a company party in a reserved park. It was a closed deal. They were not partying around the town, and people were toasting him to United States and to Russia in vodka, and that's how he got intoxicated. And so we hear trades. Oh, they want to trade this guy and this guy. That's the Russian side, and the American media just spreading these stories that the Russians are leaking or giving to their media.
Or the least they should do is try to contact someone in the State Department for a rebuttal or a response to that before they just say that story. Because my family even calls me and says, "Is this happening?" And I'm like, "No, that's not happening."
And so we don't expect Trevor and Paul to be in the news every day, but a story every week or two, just to keep, like we said, keep it on people's minds. And the fact that Trevor's in solitary confinement because he's refusing to work. And they're not allowing, I think people understand, and this isn't just in Russia. You go to a foreign country and you go to jail, and we have this impression that, the United States Embassy will be able to go see them or talk to them. And that's not the case. They're not, so no, you can't talk to him. And usually they don't say no. They just don't answer the call, or they say, "Oh, well, I'll contact someone else." There's like 150 ways to say no, and they know every one of them.
There for a while, when we were having no contact with Trevor, when the embassy would call to speak to someone about getting access to Trevor, they would just hang up on them. They wouldn't even take their calls anymore.
The jail got tired of them calling and going, "What's his condition today? Is he still there?" Blah, blah, blah. And they just would hang up on them. So, don't expect when you go to foreign countries, whether it be, Italy or wherever, not just Russia, that you're going to have that embassy there to, the embassy in our case wouldn't even show up at Trevor's arraignment. In fact, when we called and his girlfriend called the embassy and said he's injured and he's been beaten or whatever. And when we contacted the embassy, this is on Friday morning, and they said, "Oh, yeah, we'll check on him on Monday." It's like, okay, you got an American citizen who have witnesses who says he's been beaten and he's in a Russian jail, and they won't even go over there. And literally the jail is 5 minutes from the embassy. And so they wouldn't do that. And this is one of the hundreds and hundreds of things that have happened to Trevor. So on Saturday was his arraignment. They didn't show up for that. And then on Monday, they made arrangements with the investigative bureau to go visit Trevor. And they said, "Yeah, come over and we'll give you your permit so you can take it to the jail." And then they went over there to get the permit and they go, oh, sorry, we can't give you the permit. And so you just told us on the phone to come get it. And he said, well, someone higher up said you can't visit him yet. And they told us that's because he'd been beaten or he'd hurt himself. Either way, he had injuries. And the Russians didn't want the embassy to see him in that condition because they would, regardless of how he got the injuries, they would blame it on the Russian police. And so they filed a diplomatic note, and it was another 3 or 4 days before they were allowed to see Trevor. And by that time, a lot of his bruises and scratches had dissipated. He only had a couple left when they went to see him. But that's the type of thing that you're dealing with in Russia and in other foreign countries.
And plus these diplomatic notes that they write when they complain when they're not following procedure properly or they're not letting them have access to it. I was saying it doesn't really seem like those diplomatic notes mean anything to the Russians because there are no repercussions for them, it seems like. I mean, not that I'm aware of, so. You
have to understand, too, what you're up against as an American when you go out of the country. And I've been to many countries. The issue is that everyone knows our playbook. Everyone knows that the United States tries to have a higher standard of how we treat prisoners and how we have courts. And don't get me wrong, there's no perfect justice system. We've got plenty of problems, but we're way better than everybody else. And the issue is they all know that, and they know that they can do whatever they want to our people there and that we will not retaliate against their prisoners in the United States, whether they're political prisoners or whether they're just prisoners, that they can cut off communications or food or medicine or whatever they want with Trevor or Paul or all the people in Iran. They can do whatever they want to them. And they know that any prisoners in our federal prisons will not have that. We will not cut off their phone or their letters in Russian or their medical treatment or any of those things. They know that we won't retaliate for those actions. So that's what we're everything's one-sided when it comes to American prisoners in foreign lands.
So how can people keep up to date with the Free Trevor Reed campaign?
The main way is Twitter, because we try and, put something on there every day or two, and we retweet other, comments or information that's being received and news reports. We have a website, and I apologize, and I haven't updated it in like a month, but there's a lot of news stories. We attach the news stories, articles, and videos to that. And then we try and update what we know and what we've been told on the website. But you can get a lot of background as to what's gone on during his time there.
So the Twitter handle is @FreeTrevorReed.
Yes.
And the website is freetrevorreed.com.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So if any of our listeners would like to send a message of solidarity to the Reed family or have any questions, please post them on Twitter using the hashtag #PodHostageDiplomacy and we'll respond. If we get many questions, we may have a separate Q&A episode with Joey and Paula Reed to answer them. Thank you very much, Joey and Paula, for joining us. We really hope Trevor is freed and comes home. Until then, we'll be right here by your side. Thanks
Thank you,
again.
Darren.
And let's work to free Trevor Reed.
Thank you, Darren, for having us.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
And thank everyone else out there.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Pod Hostage Diplomacy. We're not just a podcast, we're a community. If you're on Twitter and would like to post a message of solidarity to the families or have any questions for us, please tweet it using the hashtag #PodHostageDiplomacy and we'll get back to you. If you like what we're trying to do, please do consider supporting the show financially. You can do this using the Support the Show link in the description of this podcast episode. We're grateful for any contributions, no matter how small. Thanks again for listening, and we'll be back next week. Take care.